Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Shindig and Archaeology podcast brought to you by the Red River Archaeology Group. My name is Luke Barry, and with me, as always, is your usual host, Dr. Tom Horne. Tom, what's the story?
The story today really is we just want to do a sort of celebration of creativity in archaeology. So that's obviously sort of to link in with the Council for British Archaeology's Festival of Archaeology, which is starting today for the next couple of weeks. And I think, as you're going to go on to say, it's something that's really close to our heart at all times, that creativity, creating content, and getting people interested in archaeology and trying to share that enthusiasm and love for it that we have.
Yeah, what struck me about this festival is the merging of archaeology and creativity. And obviously, I'm an outsider to archaeology, but storytelling is something that is dear to me. I'm a former playwright, actor, as former as you can be in any of those things. And what struck me from doing these podcasts with you and from being involved with an archaeology company is that storytelling and archaeology are the same thing, effectively. Like, what you do is storytelling, correct?
Yeah, you're getting, as I always say in archaeology, it's like we're only ever going to get 0.0000 repeating 1% of the story.
Yeah.
But you have to tell a story. You have to make a coherent narrative. And with all the caveats of, like, this is as far as we know, you still have to say, based on the evidence we have, this is the story that we can tell at the moment, and it will change in the future. But for now, this is where we are. So, and we have to tell a story because, we've got all these brilliant funders, we've got all these brilliant partners, and, we can't just sort of keep it in the ivory tower. We have to be able to tell it so that everyone can understand it. And we can't believe that, we're the gatekeepers. We've got to make it accessible to everybody and kind of fun, because inherently it is fun and it is fascinating.
Yeah. Before we started recording, you said that a friend of yours, what was the quote you said about?
My old buddy Dan Snow, great of history hit and is a brilliant outreach, and he said something along the lines of everything, history is everything that's ever happened. And so you've got to really be interested in history and archaeology because you're interested in something, and that's come out of the past. So we all love it. Sometimes we're just not aware what we love is history and archaeology as well. There are remnants of it in the past. It's coming out of something that sporting team we like, that that TV program we like, that book we're reading at the moment. That that will have its roots in the past. So we do all love it, and it's, I suppose, our job, and the job that you do so well with all your video and audio content is making that fun and very visually attractive for everybody, hopefully around the world, to enjoy.
Yeah, and absolutely, and that's where I think what we do and what this festival does so well is finding these, I suppose, new mediums like podcasting, like videos, to tell old stories, I guess. And that's what we're doing with this podcast. So I want to ask you a few questions about the podcast. You started as a guest on it in season 1, talking about your book and talking about Vikings and all that kind of stuff. But you had the opportunity to interview a lot more people in season 2. So I suppose you got a promotion from interviewee to interviewer. How was that, first of all, for you? So, like, when you were interviewing people, what were you learning about, say, yourself, about your own knowledge of archaeology from interviewing these amazing people that we've had on?
Well, I suppose anyone who knows me knows it's not a surprise that I can talk and like to talk. So it confirmed that I did enjoy talking, and also that I like chatting to my pals, and in much in the way of these things, the first ones you do because you're nervous and you just need help. We all need a little help from our friends, as the Beatles put it. That you're talking to your friends. But I think the weird thing was that suddenly you're sort of talking to your friends in a sort of professional environment.
Yeah.
And the way that you have friends that are brilliant archaeologists or medics or the worlds of finance or law or anything, but you're talking to them as someone you've known for 10, 20, 30 years, your whole life, say. And then you're talking to them as a professional adult, and you're a professional adult. And I think you
suddenly have to respect them. Is that what?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. and them to me, which is stranger for them, I think. That you're suddenly, I said that you're suddenly grown-ups, and you're talking about something important, and you want to make a good impression because the virtue. And I suppose one of the pitfalls is that potentially everyone in the world could listen to it. So I think you're aware of that when you start doing it. But I think ultimately you know the topics are interesting, and the people that you've selected are good storytellers. To go back to storytelling, we've all got to be creative and piece together that evidence and make a story that's enjoyable to listen to, because people need, if the local community doesn't feel a connection to your work, then the local council won't, then funding bodies won't. So it's in everybody's interest to make the stories that we're telling sort of interesting. So I enjoyed it as an opportunity. I knew these stories were interesting, and I knew that if we could get them out there, that then people would agree with us.
So, talking about these specific interviews that we've done, what one do you reckon, for our listeners, for our viewers, what shocked you the most? What was the most surprising one that they can go back and listen to?
No, the most surprising one, I think, is probably the second one we did, which was the second part of a two-parter with Dr. Ryan K. McNutt from the University of Georgia Southern in the States, is an old friend of mine. And he has this amazing site. So, it's a bit of background that it was a prisoner of war camp built by slaves. So the Confederates forced the slaves to build this prisoner of war camp, and it was for Union prisoners of war. Just basically, essentially a huge fence around a field with guards, armed guards, in I think they call them pigeon roosts or something like that around the outside. So if you went over the literal deadline, which was something interesting we found out, there's literally just a line, and if you crossed that, you'd be shot. And I knew about that. I've they have excellent outreach on social media and their website. And I've just known, obviously, Ryan, and I've talked about this site. It's really 10,000 people in a field, terrible conditions, and one of the worst winters I think they'd ever had at that stage, and certainly in recorded history in Georgia. People are starving. And I knew parts of that story, but I think the most surprising thing was when there's the great work that Richard Osgood and the Ministry of Defence do with Operation Nightingale, getting veterans today to dig on archaeological sites, because it's something that's really good. It gets you out of yourself. So for your mental health, actually physically doing archaeology or whatever it is you can do in history, archaeology, community projects, I encourage anyone, if they've got something, to go out, because you get to meet people. You can do it virtually if you don't want to go out, but if you can, and you can do archaeology, it's that working in the soil. I think same thing that gardening is very therapeutic. So I was aware of the sort of connection, especially the work also at Waterloo as well. They've got a lot of veterans, sort of Professor Tony Pollard and the team at Waterloo Uncovered, who I think are on site at the moment. So I was aware of that link between veterans and between mental health and archaeology. But I think it was when Ryan talked to us about these people, this is the end of 1864 that this camp opens up. It's just open for a few months before they have to move the prisoners because the Union armies are marching at pace to the south. That these people had been fighting maybe for several years. That maybe just got off, they'd come off as migrants, and then they'd been put into the Union Army. So really traumatic experiences, and some of them might have been fighting since 1861. So there's you've got thousands of people there that are suffering from post traumatic trauma, essentially PTSD. And then you were thinking, and then the way he was describing, because we've got letters, we've got diaries, and people were talking about people just essentially, going off literally digging their own grave and sort of lying down in it. And I that was just, again, I'm still even talking about it now. It was a very unpleasant thing to talk about, but it's something that I hadn't really considered. So that was the thing over the series so far that really shocked me, I would say.
Yeah, it's adding the personal story to these, I suppose, massive historical events that kind of brings it home to us in a modern, I suppose, I was going to say audience. Audience is the wrong word, but modern people. And we also did quite a bit of Viking stuff in this season, which I know you're massively interested in as a Viking boy yourself. Some of the times that we go to record, I dread having to do a Viking one because I'm like, Tom's going to get excited here. Is there anything, I suppose, what stood out to you in some of our Viking content this season?
So yeah, in Viking content, and yeah, we did quite a lot of early medieval content, and I can only apologise, but I think you'll agree it's all been fascinating, and of course I would say that, but genuinely, and we'll talk about Emma Brownlee on her burials later. But in terms of purely specifically Viking, we also had Tanaya Jorgensen and Adrian Maldonado, and with Tanaya's, it was, I think, when she talked about, she had a great line, which I was quoting to you earlier. I said we've got to mention this, and it was when she was talking about the ripples of power that were coming out of this Carolingian, the Franks, Charlemagne, and his heirs, that were coming out of essentially what is parts of modern France and Germany and the Low Countries and Luxembourg, and huge area. But when you've got this sort of super state in your borders, very much as the sort of Germanic tribes, if you will, and the Picts, say, had developed really because of their sharing a border with the Roman superstate, that it was fascinating to think of the influence that the Carolingians, for want of a better term, had on the southern Scandinavians. So what we think of now is essentially the Danes, but of course the Danes at that period in the 9th century are also in southern Sweden and southern Norway. But the influence that the Carolingians have, basically, you've got to buck your ideas up, because if you don't, they will come in and make you Christians and probably kill all of you, which is very much the Carolingian way, that as the Saxons find out to their cost, you're going to be enslaved or killed, or certainly at the very least taken away from your sort of traditional gods. So I think with Tanaya's one, she's done amazing work on mapping the movements of the Vikings, and that's something that you should listen to the podcast for. But she's also got this amazing interactive map, and you can sort of see again the effects of this ripples of power and the movements that are happening partially as a result. I mean, there's lots of other factors, but partially a result of this these super states have on what would have been thought of as sort of more tribal or societies, which again is not words we'd use today, but just to give people an idea that and it's just something that happens, and it made you think of the modern world as well, when you've got these super states like the US and China, and the effects that they have on their neighbors. You have to change, even if they're not directly involved, their influence will be huge. So I think seeing that in an early medieval context was fascinating, and from that, then later on in the season we had Dr. Adrian Maldonado from the Museum of Scotland, or Museum Scotland more generally, and he was talking about the Galloway Hoard, which I think a lot of people probably listening to this will have heard of. The most fascinating Viking style hoard, I should say, that was posted around the year 900, but it's full of this most eclectic, brilliant mix of contents. It's got a silver cup that still had its lid on it that contains some of the biggest treasures in it, and the silver cup has Zoroastrian fire temples on it. Because originally everyone thought it was more like a Carolingian cup, because you do get Carolingian style cups that are used for Viking hoards elsewhere in Britain around about the same time. So the amazing stories that Adrian and his colleagues are beginning to sort of tease out from that, I think, was fascinating. The fact is that you had these dirt balls. Now dirt balls is basically, imagine if you get some very clay soil, which is many of you will be archaeologists. You'll know how to define silty and clay soils. You have to write about them in a lot for sure. But essentially, when so the book, again, recommending on this, is Martin Goldberg and Mary Davis, and it comes out of Museum Scotland, and that talks about these dirt balls. And essentially, what I think it's Martin leading research on this, and then obviously the various scientists that have looked at this and sort of the electron microscope level of things. That so there's little balls of dirt, but they had little flecks of bone and gold in them, certainly gold leaf. And the idea that they are getting now is that this is from pilgrims going to pilgrimage sites, going to a saint's tomb that's maybe a sort of gilded marble tomb above it, and they're getting a bit of clay soil and they're rubbing it over this tomb, and it becomes what we call as a contact relic. And maybe what they're doing is they've gone into the actual tomb itself, where it's just sort of bone dust and things like that, and they've rolled it about in that too. So they've got a little bit of the saint in these balls. I think we were talking at the end of that podcast that if they're Vikings or people that are acting like Vikings that are getting all these I call them treasures for want of a better word, but all the silver and the gold and the silks, again, amazing textile survivals in the Galloway Hoard, but that's maybe been taken in raids. And so is this idea that sinners are getting something that a bit of a saint in this as well. So that was this basically the work and the literal microscopic detail and the work that the projects, the National Museum of Scotland and National Museum Scotland, as I say, is more general for that group, are finding, and the future is, I mean, it's already exciting, the stuff they're finding at the moment, but there's just so much more to do. That was a revelation to me as well.
I just want to point out that Dirt Balls would be a great name for an archaeology podcast. If there's anybody else out there wanting to start one, Dirt Balls is the way to go with it. Or
the we've already just got copyright on it, I think.
Oh yeah, sorry, it's ours. It's ours now.
Yeah.
That can be the name.
That's our spin-off. That's our spin-off.
It can be the name of our listeners. They can be the Dirt Balls.
The Dirt Ball. There we go.
I just want to point out that we were talking about Tanaya. We want to give a shout out to Tanaya in the aim of archaeology and creativity. She is one of the founders of this podcast in season 1. Yep. Her and Jansky. So just a quick shout out to them before we move on. You mentioned there Emma Brownlee, who we did an amazing podcast with a little while back, and then it became massive news shortly afterwards. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and why people should go back and listen to that incredible podcast?
So Dr. Emma Brownlee was talking to us about this amazing phenomenon of early medieval bed burial. So it is what it says on the tin. It's like you're buried in your bed. This idea of comfort in death was very important. I mean, today is particularly in the early medieval period, where they would essentially recreate essentially your kind of like your bed chamber. To take you into the afterlife. It's that classic thing I think I said in the podcast. It's the Victorian formula that you find on tombstones. Not dead, only sleeping. You're awaiting the resurrection, but in comfort. So she was giving this idea that that you could really see, because this idea in archaeology that the dead don't bury themselves, and it's something we say. But I think it really made me think about it. The fact is, you could really see the sort of loved ones of this person sort of laying them to rest, literally and figuratively on a bed. So Emma took us through this phenomenon with its origins, maybe in sort of Coptic Egypt, and then spreading throughout Europe. There's a sort of concentration in Germany, but then you get this phenomenon that's linked with the spread of Christianity and elite women that are bringing Christianity to sort of 7th century Anglo-Saxon England. And she talked about some examples of those burials, like the Harpole treasure burial, which is a probable bed burial as well. But also we ended on the Trumpington burial as well, which is another bed burial. And and just after that, it became this huge news because they'd done a facial reconstruction of the woman who'd been buried there, and that went around the world. And I've spoken to Emma and the team, and we're hopeful soon we will be able to record a podcast with Emma and all her brilliant colleagues that have done this full range of, sort of scientific and isotopic analysis of the bones, and we know about the origin of the person buried. So it's we're linking into news stories, and then we're reacting to them as well. So hopefully that's something for our listeners and viewers to enjoy in the future.
Exciting. So we did Dr. Terence Christian was somebody we interviewed at another point. Speaking about, I guess, American history, which is something almost everybody knows quite a bit about because we grow up on American culture and American television pretty much all over the world. But in this, there was kind of a bombshell towards the end of this.
As you alluded to, really huge news from the podcast with Dr. Terence Christian, also supported by Dr. Amanda Sharland, another really good friend of mine. So they're doing some commercial archaeology, very much like we do, but they were doing it in Western Pennsylvania. And of course, for people who know that in the 18th century, Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, the forks of the Ohio, this part of the world is where kind of everything comes out of, because everyone is kind of fighting over this sort of strategic area that you control these river systems, and then everybody wants to expand west ultimately. Not good news for First Nations and Native Americans, but that's what the colonists want to do. So there's a lot of friction about that, both between the French colonists in Canada and the essentially sort of British colonists and what was then the 13 colonies. So there's tension amongst that, and then there's also tensions as well between the 13 colonies and Britain, because they want to expand west and they don't want to pay taxes to cover what the British, certainly from the British perspective, was a huge increase. You have to put a standing army in, you have to fight wars to protect this. So there's a lot of tension, just a huge amount of tension. So Christian was like going into essentially a tiny aspect of this as part of commercial archaeology, and he was just asked to look at historic property in Pennsylvania, in a place called Bedford. And the owners thought it was an important, maybe a sort of 18th, 19th century historic structure that had been built into the structure that they just purchased. And Terence and Amanda went to have a look. They were paid as commercial archaeologists, I say, as the work that we do. And the work that they were uncovering and revealing on this podcast was that it looked very much like this was part of a tavern. So a tavern, not just like a pub, but a hotel as well, that was just outside the British fort that was there. The British fort was there during what we would call the 7 Years' War in North America, and the Americans and Canadians call the French and Indian War, because that was the British fighting the French and the Native Americans. So there's a fort there, and there were lots of campaigns in that area. And the fort at Bedford had this tavern just outside it, and that's where the officers would go. And who was an officer at that time? A young British officer in the militia, or as you might have interpreted it, he was George Washington. Mm-hmm. So when Terence and Amanda were discovered that this dated to the mid 18th century, then you could say, reasonably argue that this is literally a space that George Washington could have discovered. And if you're from the United States, that is obviously huge news, and it just shows you commercial archaeology is not just it's not what we think of it. You think of it as somebody in a muddy field somewhere in Britain and Ireland or Europe for our business, but you can be inside a historic building somewhere in Western Pennsylvania, and you can be finding something that could really have a big impact on regional and sort of national history.
Yeah, well, commercial archaeology you mentioned there, which brings us a little bit closer to home. We did some interviews within our own company. We interviewed Trish Long, Ed Line, Ken Hanley about the M28 project, and we also did a separate interview with Jennifer McCarthy, who worked on that project among others for the company. I think these podcasts really showed how important commercial archaeology is and how, I guess, well structured it is, because you see all these people working together and for one aim, which is obviously history, archaeology, and to, for TII to build better road structures. What's your take on, I guess, commercial archaeology from listening to those people speak about it with such passion and interest?
I think that's it. You'll just see a logo on something, and very attractive logos of TII and Cork County Council, say, and you'll say these are these big sort of monolithic organizations, and they're directing money and resource, and this thing happens, and this thing is the project, the engineering project, the mega project, and the archaeology happen, and that's it. But talking to Ken Hanley and Ed Line and Jennifer McCarthy showed you that they're just like us, like the people that are listening to and watching this now, that they are people who are genuinely interested in archaeology, and they know the responsibility of reporting that, and, as we're saying, telling this story to the local and national and international communities. So that's what came across, that they all had they're still archaeologists. We're professionals. We work in these huge engineering projects, but we're still archaeologists. We still love finding that tiny fragment of that someone was holding 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, and as Jennifer says, you're that feeling that you're the first person to hold it since it was dropped, and say in the Bronze Age. And that came across, as you say, their passion and interest was over and above what they needed to do for their jobs. They were interested in it. They're part of that community as well, so they want to tell that story. And we knew that, but I think it's important that everybody can understand that, because it might just be seen as this sort of as I say, this sort of very sort of process driven activity of project is commissioned, paid for, some archaeology happens on the side, and then people move on. But it's very much not. This is archaeologists, appreciating their environment, appreciating local community, and being able to tell these amazing stories.
Okay, so I guess, for me as an outsider looking in on archaeology, it's really struck me how important, I guess, commercial archaeology is, because these things are done. I know this sounds like I'm towing the company line, which I am a bit, but it's what I've noticed is these things are done so professionally, so quickly, to a budget, to a deadline. But it's what's very important for that area. Like if we take, say, Carrigaline and Ringaskiddy, where M28 is at the moment, that locality is really enjoying what's being found. We've had schools come visit the sites. We've had Trish Long go out and give talks to schools, to community groups. We've had the Tidy Towns groups in Carrigaline come and look at the site and visit it. And it's amazing to see that kind of outreach happening in local areas, because you hear of these big, massive schemes, and sometimes they can be looked at maybe negatively, or how they're affecting an area. You only see diggers going in and things like that. For them to actually get to see these positives, I think, is amazing. It's great. And to get the videos and these podcasts on top of that, to spread it out to, I guess, the world, is even more amazing, I think.
And yeah, it's the kind of thing I'd like to, my background was in TV and documentaries. And so when I came to this company and found out we had someone of your level of professionalism and skill and experience, I was absolutely overjoyed. So, this is probably a question really from my TV background, but how, as you say, sometimes unfairly, that you're kind of an outsider to archaeology. We're getting you now. Don't worry, you're in the building, as it were. How have you found filming with archaeologists? We're a funny bunch, and being on site. I suppose your perspective as a documentarian, I think that's the word, and documentary maker, and as a non-archaeologist, going to going to these sites and talking to archaeologists and recording them?
I think it helps that I'm a non-archaeologist doing it, because I probably ask what to you and to them would seem like a stupid question or a silly question. But for making a video like we're making, you're not necessarily making it for other archaeologists. Obviously, they are going to look at it as well, but you're making it for the public, for the people in the area, for possibly clients for the company, that kind of a thing. So being a non-archaeologist, I think, really helps me in that sense. How I found it is I find it fascinating. Every time I get to make something, I'm now learning something. Do you know what I mean? Like before, a lot of my background would have been filming stuff to do with wrestling, which I wouldn't say I'm an expert in, but it's my field effectively, or would have been to do with acting or theatre or restaurant and bar work, or where I did a lot of my own, I suppose, filming and documentary making. That would have been stuff that I know an awful lot about. Archaeology, I know very little about, so it's amazing experience for me to get to make these videos. And I now have a log on our YouTube, on our Twitter, on our Facebooks and Instagram of my learning experience throughout of what I'm filming and what I'm doing. Every time I get to talk to somebody, it's fascinating. Like there's a video coming out soon. Spoilers. The video coming out soon about a Neolithic house that was found on site. And yes, and we got to talk to Philip, who was in charge of finding it, and talking to Shirley, who is a lithic expert, who found some of the stuff there. And getting to talk to those people is incredible, because I know nothing about it. They know an awful lot about these things. And I get a first-hand look at these things. I get to be the first person to ask them questions about these things and bring them to an audience effectively. It's incredible. I love it. And you say archaeologists are an odd bunch. That makes it even better. You know what I mean? It's more fun. You're getting to talk to these interesting characters all the time. I love it.
And what then? You know, the directors will be listening to these. What would you like to do now? Would you like to make maybe something more ambitious, like a sort of a day in the life, a sort of mini documentary sort of level of things?
There's something like that in the works at the moment. Actually, there is my plan. I might as well just say it. I'm planning on making a day in the life of our post-ex team who work in the office here where I am. I'm looking at the stuff they're doing, and it's fascinating. And because it's just in our post-ex area out the back, it's not necessarily been brought to the public yet. My aim is to film a day in the life, specifically focusing on Serena, who's the supervisor there, and seeing what they're doing, what they're uncovering, what they're finding as they're working on our M28 scheme, the stuff that's been found there. So I think it's something to look forward to. If you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel, if you're listening to this on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, head on over to our YouTube channel, hit subscribe, because there's going to be an awful lot of new content coming, including things like that, which I think are interesting if you're interested in archaeology, if you're interested in people, if you're interested in stories. It's going to be a good little short documentary, I suppose.
And we've got a lot coming up as well. We're talking about, obviously, the Festival of Archaeology, which is obviously more in the UK side of things. But we've got Heritage Week coming up in Ireland in August. So maybe you just like to give some hints and some spoilers, if you will, on what's happening with that in terms of your involvement. As
well as the social media content creation side of things, I also work in the office here as the office manager. So part of my daily task is organizing events, finding rooms for talks, that kind of a thing. So I have a very close look at everything that's going on with Heritage Week. There's nothing set in stone yet, but we're in the middle of organizing lots of different talks. Obviously pending available spaces, available people, that kind of a thing. But there's going to be an awful lot happening for Heritage Week. Obviously, we will keep you up to date, get as much videos, as much photos, as much content as we can. So make sure to follow us on all of our social medias to stay abreast of that. But we're planning an awful lot, including something that's in its early stages at the moment. We have an exhibition of our M28 photography in the Carrigaline Library, which is the nearest big town to the scheme. In that local library, there's an exhibition of photographs all taken by our site staff. I think that's what makes it interesting. It's what makes Red River and Rubicon different, I suppose, in that they're showcasing not only the archaeology work of our amazing staff, but the creative work and the photography of them as well. So you can go and see that in the Carrigaline Library at the moment, all throughout July. And that will be transferring to the Cove Library in August, which will cover Heritage Week. And in the August one, it's going to become bigger. There'll be talks at it. There'll be more photographs and hopefully a bit of fun. And some of the videos will be on display that we've made throughout the year on that project as well. So it's all stuff made by in-house staff. That's what I think is incredible about this exhibition.
Yeah, and as you say, it's something our company, our group is, out with, to use a Scottish word, Heritage Week and the Festival of Archaeology. We love these festivals and weeks because it's something that we just want to do anyway, and something we've been doing a lot over the last 2 or 3 years on. Say with Tanaya and John Ski with the podcast and the John Ski videos and the videos that Luke is now making as well. That it's just something that we want to do, and because we've both got that quite long experience in sort of web and media, traditional media, myself and television and Luke with podcasting and videos as well. It's just something that comes natural to us, and we found a company and a group that allows us to tell these stories. So to go back to the beginning of the Festival of Archaeology, we're telling stories. We're not telling tales. We're telling stories, and I love it. And these jobs where you look forward to going into work, and this is certainly one of them. We hope you're enjoying this, and you hope we're enjoying just us chatting about the sort of process. Hopefully it's more interesting than how a sausage is made. I think the whole thing is like don't ever find out the thoughts behind it, but hopefully this is given people some insight, because there'll be lots of people there that are just starting jobs, or juniors in social media, or juniors in outreach, and they want to hear sort of a couple of people that have been doing it for a few years, and we're still making mistakes, we're still experimenting. It's still fun. You'll make mistakes on a daily basis, but yeah, we're just all trying to do that same thing and get people to hear these amazing stories about history, archaeology, and sort of community heritage.
Absolutely, and that's why I think this festival that we're talking about is so important, because archaeology and creativity are linked together completely, it seems. You can see that in that exhibition that we have at the moment in Carrigaline. The people on site are the artists, they are the creatives that are being showcased in that, similar to all these videos that go up online are showcasing people. It's amazing. It's incredible. If you're interested in this sort of thing, in these videos, in these podcasts, in how they're made, as we say in this, stay tuned. Keep coming back. Hit subscribe on your podcast app. Hit subscribe or follow anywhere you're hearing this or seeing this on social media, on YouTube. Leave us a comment anywhere you can. Let us know what you'd like to see. Let us know what you thought of these episodes. If you go back and listen to the old episodes, let us know which ones are your favorite. Who would you like to see as a guest on again? All these things. This is your podcast. We're doing this for you. It's all in the name of outreach. It's all in the name of getting these stories, getting these voices heard. And that's what we want to do. That's what we love to do. So let us know how you're enjoying it.
And just leave it to me from behalf of ourselves in the Red River Archaeology Group. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll hopefully see you again soon.